I love this story. I've been in love with it ever since I was a little boy, and we had a really creative Sunday school teacher. She let us lie down on a mat, and we picked up each other, and we walked around the Sunday school class time and time again. But when I asked her if we could rip through the roof, she said no. I never quite got that. But don't you love this story of these friends who care about this person so much that they're literally willing to rip a roof off to get someone to Jesus? So what are you willing to do for your friends? How far will you go to help your friends find Jesus? I heard one time about a test that they were giving for a job interview. The test went like this. It says, suppose you're driving in a car and it's cold and rainy and dark, and you see three people at a bus stop. You see an older lady who looks like she is about to freeze. Perhaps she's going to die. And sitting beside her is your very best friend who once saved your life. And beside her is a person of your dreams just looking. You know that this person is who you would love to spend the rest of your life with, but there's only one seat in your car. Who will you take? Well, several hundred people applied for this job, but only one got the job. And this is what he said. He said, I would give my car keys to my best friend. I would ask him to take the older lady to the hospital for treatment. Then I would wait at the bus stop with the person of my dreams. Now that's a creative person, isn't it? Someone who thinks outside of the box. This is what we need to do. We need to think bigger and think, what is it we're willing to do to bring our friends to Jesus? Are we willing to be a friend despite the limitations that we have or that they have? You see, the world tells us to choose our friends according to those folks who can do something for us. Have you ever noticed that if you have something, folks want to be your friends? The Ivesters lived up the street from me when I was growing up, just up on the corner, 2 houses up, and they were just a nice family. We liked them, but we weren't best friends with them until one summer we saw this backhoe going into their backyard. So we all gathered around, and guess what they were digging? A pool. Well, the Ivesters became the best friends of everyone in the entire neighborhood all of a sudden. Folks that win the lottery say that they find all kinds of friends coming out of the woodwork. Relatives and folks who call them and claim that they need help, people that say they're veterans, or people that say they need a surgery, or people who say they're their long-lost cousins. When we have something, it seems like we want to be friends, or we find friends that can help us. Speaking of cousins, my cousin James, when he was growing up, he was a very popular kid, and he was a popular adult as well when he grew up. But one day his mom picked him up from school when he was about 2nd grade, I guess, and she said, James, today we're going to take you to get ice cream. He said, no thanks, Mom, I already had some, I don't care for any. Well, she thought this was really strange, and so my Aunt Libby said to her son, how did you get ice cream today? Did they have a party at school? He said, no, I bought it. She said, well, with what? I didn't give you any money for ice cream today. He said, well, my friend Tommy gives me a quarter every day to sit by him at lunch. And I buy ice cream with the extra money. Well, my Aunt Libby explained to him right then and there that you do not buy friendship. She calculated how many quarters James had gotten, and he had to pay Tommy back every dime. And then she said, not only that, you're going to sit by that boy from here on out to the end of school to make up for this. They tell this story on my cousin a lot, and he used to tell the end of the story. The end of the story was that once he quit taking the quarters, he actually started talking to his friend. And he found out that Tommy was a pretty good kid, and they became good friends for the right reason. Sometimes we look at others and we think they don't have a a lot to offer us, and so maybe we pass by them. But in this story, we find these friends of a paralytic man. Now, in Jesus' day, those who could not get up and work were basically assigned to be beggars. We find Jesus often encountering these beggars, these folks, and they didn't have many friends usually. Why? Because they didn't have much to offer. And yet in this story, we find these other men that care so deeply that they're willing to go get this person and to take him to Jesus, to give up their day and to go out and to work for others. Yesterday, I was so proud of our congregation. So many of you came out to work on our special day when we go out and we do to others. We go out and we help them in Operation Inasmuch. Yesterday, our congregation built 3 handicap ramps. We didn't literally take a roof off of a church, but we built ramps onto the front of homes so that folks can get out of their house and get down and to be with their friends and be able to get out into the world again. There are a lot of other projects going on here as well. So many people did so many good things, like going and singing at the nursing home or making the soup mixes to give to those who are hungry. So much was happening because we looked out and we didn't ask, what can they do for us, but what can we do for them? And as we think through this, do you realize that Jesus, who is our best friend, gets very little from us? I mean, what do we have to offer the Lord? We who are sinners in need of God's grace. And yet Jesus looks at us despite all of our limitations and loves us and calls us unto himself. These friends were willing to carry their friend. Are we willing to do the extra mile for those who are in need? Are we willing to reach out to them? Eli Wiesel, who wrote the book Night, he was in a German concentration camp, talks about how he survived that awful ordeal. He says that the reason he lived was because of his father. He knew that his father was older, and that if he died, that his father would not be long after. This is what he writes. He says, the Germans tried to get the inmates to think only of themselves, to forget our relatives and our friends and tend only to our own needs. But what happened was just the reverse. Those who retreated into a universe of their own bodies had less chance of getting out alive, while those who chose to live for a brother or a friend or an ideal held out so much longer. When we take our eyes off of ourselves and we reach out and we share what we have with our friends, and we're willing to carry their burdens as well, things can change. Some years ago, I had the privilege of being out at the Grand Canyon helping to lead a scout troop, and we wanted to walk down into the canyon a ways. We knew we couldn't walk all the way down. We weren't prepared for that, but we thought, let's walk down about a mile and just see what it's like down in there. The problem was one of the boys with us named Kyle had problems with his Achilles tendons. He really couldn't walk long distances, and coming uphill was a lot worse. And so we thought, well, we can't do that. And all the other boys said, it's okay. We'll carry him out of there if we have to. Because we told him we weren't going down unless we all went. And so we went. He did all right on the way down. But as we turned around after that mile and started coming back out, we realized something. And that is that going a mile down the Grand Canyon feels like 10 miles coming back up. You're tired, and it's hot, and it's steep. And sure enough, those boys got around Kyle and got on either side of him and started helping them up. And then they created a pretty ingenious way of helping. Two of them stood in front of him and he grabbed hold of their backpacks, and they walked and pulled, and two stood behind him and helped him out. Their friend went down, their friend came back up. What are you willing to do? Would you be willing to carry a friend if needed? This is what these folks did for this paralytic man. Are we willing to work together? These fellows, they had to work together. Now, if you ever look at a picture in Sunday school that shows these men, it always shows four of them, one on each corner, right? Well, that's because there's four corners, and that's how you usually carry somebody on a stretcher, but it doesn't really say how many there were. It just says that there were a group of them, but they worked together. They came together to do whatever was needed for this friend. Sometimes it's hard to accept help. Do you remember back about the turn of the century, there was a Russian submarine named Kursk. It sank, and it was on the bottom of the Barents Sea, and there were 118 sailors, and the Russians were looking for the submarine, and they were trying to help, and the U.S. and Great Britain and Norway and several others offered help, and the Russian Navy said, "Niet, no, we can handle this." It took them 16 hours to find the sub, and another 15 hours before they could get a rescue vehicle down. And by this time, all the sailors were gone. When they finally raised the sub, they found notes that the sailors had written in the dark, hoping for rescue, expressing their love for those that were being left behind. 5 years later, another Russian sub went to the bottom. This was a mini sub, not nearly as many folks on it. It got caught and tangled in some nets. Maybe you remember about this. And this time, when others offered help, they said, yes, we will take the help. The British were first on the scene, and they had an underwater craft named Scorpio, and it went down and it found the vessel, and it had a special attachment that could cut the cables away and release the sub, and it surfaced, and all were saved because they were willing to take help and willing to work together for a change. This is a great church. There are a lot of us, and just like on Operation Inasmuch yesterday, when we work together as teams, when we bring our friends to Jesus and bring our friends here together, we find even more friends, and we find a great team for Christ. Are we willing to be creative? This is my favorite part about this story. They were willing to do whatever it took to get their friend to Jesus. They got there, and there was this great crowd, and as you read, it was really, really important people that were in the house. It says they came from all over, these important scribes and Pharisees, and they were right there, and they crowded around Jesus, and then there were all the others, and just people surrounding the house trying to hear Jesus' teachings. And these folks got there, and they said, well, we can't get in. Did they turn and walk away? Absolutely not. They started looking around for something to do, some way to get their friend in to Jesus. Have you ever heard that saying that if you want to figure out the most efficient way to do something, give it to the laziest person? Some folks think that Bill Gates said that, or Walter Chrysler. Well, it really came about in the 1920s when a man named Frank Gilbreth was studying efficiency in work, studying how many movements it took to do things on an assembly line. And as he looked, he found out that those who were the laziest quickly figured out the easiest way to do it. It's true, and sometimes maybe we need to get a little bit lazier. Maybe not lazy, but creative. We can sit here this morning and make all kinds of excuses about why we shouldn't bring our friends, or why this shouldn't happen or that happen, or why our church might not be growing. or we can get creative and say, Lord, whatever it is that you call upon me to do, I will do. Our team that's going to Belize is reading a book together. The book is entitled, Not God Enough: Why Your Small God Leads to Big Problems. It's by J.D. Greer, who's pastor of Summit Church in the Raleigh-Durham area. And in that book, he talks about his daughter, and his daughter likes airplanes. And J.D. says that she often sees planes in the sky, and she'll point them out, and he'll look up, and sure enough, there's a plane up there. And he kept trying to think, why is it that she sees these planes and I don't? Is it because she just loves planes? And then all of a sudden he realized, when she pointed out a plane and he looked down at her, that she was looking up. You see, she's a little girl. She has to look up to see the world. Everybody else is taller, and so as she's looking up, she's just looking towards the sky all the time, and she sees the planes that no one else sees. These folks got to Jesus, and it was too crowded. And one of them had this inspiration. One of them looked up and said, hey, we can go up on the roof, and we can lower him down. Think about all of those important folks that were standing around Jesus when the roof started crumbling. You know some tile had to fall through. I walked by yesterday when they were sawing on one of the handicap ramps, and just walked behind the saw and got sawdust blown all over me. You know, if they started tearing up a roof, stuff's going to start falling down. And these important people are down there, and Jesus is down there. And these friends lower this man down right in front of Jesus. What an amazing thing. And Jesus looks at this man, he looks up, and he sees these fellows looking down through the roof. And he says to him, friend, isn't that an interesting choice of words? Is he Jesus' friend? Well, yes. But he sees these fellows, and he knows that this person is a friend. For friends have brought him. He says, friend, your sins are forgiven. And then there's this debate with those important folks who say, you can't say that. And Jesus says, I can. I want to show you the power that I have. I can also say, get up and walk. And the man gets up and walks away. Because those friends brought their friend to Jesus for physical healing. That's what they saw. That's what they thought he needed, and he did. But Jesus saw him and knew that he also needed spiritual healing. That he needed something more than anyone recognized. What if you brought a friend next week and they heard something that changed their life? That something touched their very soul? Wouldn't it be worth whatever inconvenience it might have been for you to bring them? I mean, there's a lot of excuses we could make. I don't know who to bring. Well, why don't you pray and ask God to open your eyes? I think that it might mess up our friendship if I invite them to church. How could bringing someone to know Jesus mess up your friendship? Well, I'm anxious and I don't really do that kind of thing, inviting people to church. Well, what about these friends who said, we're going to get this friend to Jesus no matter what? if you've not yet decided to bring a friend next week, I'd encourage you to read Luke 5 one more time and see what these folks were willing to do. Identify a friend. Pray for your friend. Bring your friend to Jesus.